When we are designing a web page, we use elements, and elements come with 4 components, 3 which we use all the time and 1 that's not always there. And we are talking about the content. Then it comes with padding, then it comes with a border, and outside that is margins. Hi, my name is JP. Welcome to Back to Basics here at Brizy, and we're talking about margins. This is focused on beginners to learn a little bit more about margins and how that can improve your website design. This is specifically focused on the design part. Now you're going to find margins everywhere for every element. If I go to this heading element and I go over to my styling, you will see we have margins here in the sidebar. Here I also have a line element. Same thing if I go to the styling, we have margins. Same here for this button. I'll go here to the styling section and again we have margins. You're going to find it everywhere. The number one purpose of margins is to provide space between elements. The moment you have many elements on your page and you want to add some little bit of separation between them, the best way to go is margins. You could consider padding and you could also consider the spacer, but in most cases, margins is just going to make it so much easier because you want that additional space. Let's look at that as a use case. I have down here some text, I have a line element up here for a design element, and I have my button. This looks cramped, it looks bad. And remember, space is always needed on your page to create separation. And once you have separation, people can read better, they can access things better, and that also helps you to group things, and that creates a better layout. To access the margins for any element, select the margins, go to the settings and then styling, and you have margins here on the right. You have the margins at the top, right, bottom, and left. And currently these are all linked. So if I grab the margin slider and I drag it to the right, which is a positive value, I am applying margins equally on all the sides. If I want it back at 0, I'll just double click in the value box and type 0. Most cases, you are going to delink all the sides. Select this icon and now you have 4 sliders. It starts at the top, the right, bottom, and left, and that's always the order it is going to operate. Note that you have pixels and the option to put it in percentage. Whereas in padding, I often use percentage. I hardly do so in margins. With margins, you really want to control that precise distance between your elements or when you're creating overlaps, which we will tackle soon. So let's stick to pixels. If you need, you can play around with percentage. As everything works from top down in a web page layout, you are going to work margins with the top and the bottom. But I'll show you a few use cases where you're going to use the right and the left in a short bit. For now, what we want to do is create that separation between the line element and then this heading over here. So to do that, I will go to the bottom margin and I'll increase it to the right. And that adds the space under the line element and creating distance and that separation. Let's do the same for this heading. Let's just make the heading a little bit bigger. I'll put it on a heading 1. That looks good. And then select it again. Go to our settings, styling, and I'll delink all my sides and I'll increase the bottom margin to create more separation. And you can see immediately this little section begins to look much better. For the next one, let's go to the button this time and apply a margin at the top. And I'll delink them again and I'll apply space at the top. I can go to 100. Just remember that if you need more than 100, simply select and type in the value you want. I would say in a case where you are looking at this amount, I would rather use a spacer because it's going to be much easier to create that space on your page. But this is what margins do. Now that we've looked at that, let's tackle 2 other features of margins, and that is negative margins and also how you can create overlapped elements. This brings me to another important characteristic of margins, and that is when you look at the element box in which you have your content. Like here, I have an image. If I select it, you start with your content, which is the image. Then your image will have padding. That we know. Go to our settings, styling, and you will see that we can apply padding. The third component is a border, and for the image you can apply a border by going to the color icon and you will see the border appears here. And then the fourth one is the margin. So margins envelop all 3 of those. When you apply a margin, it applies it outside of the border. Before we look at why that is important, let's look here now at negative margins and how to create overlap images. I'll select this image, and then from my margins, let's go over to the right slider, and we're going to work with the margin on the right. Now, when it comes to this artistic, creative application of margins, there's no hard and fast rule. You're going to find sometimes as you play around with it, it will work, and other times you will have to wangle it until you find something that works for you. What I'm going to do is just first drag it to the right. And as you can see, as I drag it to the right, I am applying a margin, more space outside of the border, which is essentially pushing my image smaller, right? So it's a little bit counterintuitive at some points. But remember, the margin is outside of the content, the padding and the border. And because we have two columns here, it will push the rest of those three components, namely the border, the content, and the padding, inwards. And that is why we're getting this. But we can apply negative margins, which will allow us to increase our element space, basically. Grab the slider and we drag it. We go all the way to 0, and now we are where we started, and then I'll continue moving beyond the negativity. Look at that. Now I am increasing the area for the content and the padding and the border by that negative margin. And this allows me to create this overlap image compilation that you often see on websites. I'm going to keep it simple. Click on the next image. We go and do the same. And now we want to apply a positive margin at the top, and that will squash it in. And by doing so, we've created a very good overlap. While we are here, let's quickly talk about responsive design. Just like with all the other features within Brizy, if we go on over to our responsive design here on the left side and select tablet, you will see that our images are not overlaid. Why? Because this is how it will look by default on tablet, and if you go to a mobile device, it's going to be stacked. For each of these responsive designs, you will have to design them independently. If I want to have a creative overlap here, I do exactly the same. I'll click on the image, I go to the right slider, I'll drag it into a negative margin, I click on the next image, and then I apply a positive margin at the top to bring it in. On mobile devices, this is a big question because it looks the way it should look, but let's do something different here. The first thing I will do is I will create a positive margin on the right to bring it in, and then we click on the next image. Then I'm going to apply a positive margin on the right. And then to move it upwards, I will apply a negative margin at the top. Pretty nice. Remember, all of these responsive controls and whatever you do on mobile is not affected on tablet, and it doesn't affect desktop. They all work independently. Super bananas. Bananas are high in potassium. Let's move on to the last application of margins, which you are going to run into when you are designing a feature set like this within Brizy. I have here 4 columns, and within the columns, I have an icon, a heading, and a little bit of text, and I've applied padding. But what I have also done on the column is that I have applied a border. This is the orange box that you can see, but it looks bad, right? The reason it looks bad is because there's no separation between these 4 columns. It looks squashed and it looks super unprofessional. How we apply this separation within Brizy is to go to the column settings, styling, and then we are going to work with the margins. The easiest way to do this is to link all the sides, grab the slider and drag it to the right. And I'll just type in there 15 because I think that's a grand value. And now we've created that separation. Next, I will go to the column settings, right click on it and select copy. And then for the others, I will go and say paste styles and paste styles. But just be careful, if you get to this one and you say paste styles, you're going to see that it will also apply the color styling of that column, which is what we don't want for this one. So hit Ctrl Z, Command Z to undo it. And here we'll just go in again. And we will change the styling, and that was 15 pixels, all sides locked together. A final remark is that whenever you bring in a new block and you bring in elements onto your page, that the team at Brizy has thought about the fact that when you bring elements onto your page, you probably already want it to look as good as possible, and because of that, certain settings are already locked in, but you can go and change it. If I've dragged in here a text, an icon, and a button. Note that when I click on the text element and we go over to the styling, you will see that there is already a margin applied of 10 pixels at the top and 10 at the bottom. The same if I go over to the icon and select it here on the right, 10 at the top, 10 at the bottom. And the more you work with this, the more you begin to understand that between the elements, there is a default space of 20 pixels, 10 at the top, 10 at the bottom, and then for the next one again, 10 at the top, 10 at the bottom. And that's how you get that little separation. This is a great starting point. And for most cases, you're going to find you'll be dropping in it. You won't even be thinking of the margin. If you do run into that case where you think, why is there this space? I want to get rid of it. Just remember, it is a default setting. You just go over to your settings, your styling, and you can make it 0 like so. Or you can link it and just make sure you type in 0 there as well to have that value go through. And so we come to an end with Back to Basics with JB in this quick look at margins. Hope this was helpful and it can really elevate your website designing process. Padding and margins combined are really essential to your website design. There is almost not a web page out there that doesn't extensively make use of these two features. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, also give us a like, and remember to head on over to Brizy.io.